Hello to each and every one of you. Thank you for tuning in today. And now that you're here, you're part of the Reset with Raven family. So welcome. I'm Raven M. Harris, the host of Reset with Raven. And today we have a guest that I've been looking forward to conversing with for weeks. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, burned out, stressed, and in a constant state of doing and on to the next thing, or task or job, you don't want to miss this conversation. Today, I'm joined by Renée Dineen. She's a leadership and team performance coaching consultant who leads in the intersection of business and psychology. As a recovering workaholic and doing addict, her transformation is an empowering story of reclaiming your life to come into greater choice and greater freedom. Welcome, Renee.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I don't know why it took a few weeks, but I tend to trust the timing of the universe. So thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Renee, a few years ago, you left a 7-figure role for a biotech company where you were doing work you loved. Why? What made this change necessary and why then?
Yeah, it's so well, I love how you frame that because I think that when you love something and you feel good at it and you're receiving reward, most of us kind of think that we should just stay put, right? And not tilt the scales against our favor. And so I love to acknowledge that my leaving my corporate executive role was not about me being unhappy per se, or not feeling like I was potentially doing work that I was really designed to do. It really was a choice around lifestyle. I am a recovering workaholic, raised by workaholics, probably raising a workaholic, at least in my daughter. And I was completely consumed with my career for a majority of my adult life. I was lucky enough to start my career in the Silicon Valley during the first big boom in the 90s. And I'm an organizational psychologist. And while that to the world at large was a newer sort of vocation, a newer trade, or a newer specialty in the HR field, the Silicon Valley and the context, what was going on in that area at that time really embraced this role. So my appetite was well fed. And I even think at times, I lost my sense of identity in terms of who I was and what I was up to as, separate from my work. So after 20 plus years doing work I loved, I started to physically manifest things such as a stutter and a tremor. I was chronic insomniac. I'd gotten to the point where I was unable to stay or even come into presence with my family and friends and sort of just be wherever I was fully. Work was always on my back. It just was. And so I don't know that everyone who gets to that point, people ask if I was suffering from burnout. I probably had some form of burnout for years. My nervous system was so used to living that way that I got comfortable there. Even though I knew health-wise it wasn't great and relationship-wise it was also not great. So I decided I was going to go out on my own. I think what helped me make the final decision, though, is that I kind of always knew I would go out on my own. A lot of org psychologists do start their own coaching and consulting practices. So I knew that was a viable option for me. But what I had to get crystal clear at is I didn't want to leave and then fall back into the same patterns. And so I set really pretty rigid boundaries over my time. So max kind of 20 hours a week, billable time, taking holidays off when my kids are off. If they're off at spring break, they're off at summer, et cetera, I'm pretty much off. So it took me a few years to build a new routine around my life so that the reasons for leaving could actually come to fruition, which was to do work that I loved without sacrificing the whole of my life. And it's not an easy journey, but a very worthy journey. I'm still on it. I don't know that I'll ever arrive at this more simplistic, balanced life that I seek. But I'm in it and I'm tasting it daily and I'm not going to give up.
That's good. And this is so timely that we're having this conversation today because yesterday, at the time of this recording, Naomi Osaka from the tennis world uh, removed herself from the French Open. And I know, and she shares how much she loves tennis. However, she
Mhm.
felt that it was weighing on her confidence and her ability to show up and be present and to have that level of, I guess, awareness that she wants on the court. And then personally, she removed
Mhm.
herself from the games. And there was a lot of support you saw from a lot of other celebrities saying, good for you for that self care, for that awareness that, you're not in a good place right now, even though you're doing something you love. She's being well compensated. I think she was like the highest earning female athlete last year, but there's something that she knows is like not right, and she needs to take care of herself. And one of the
Mhm.
things that you have mentioned is that one of your drivers is reaching human and organizational suffering, to end that and to help people through that.
Minimizing that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, in what ways do you see humans and organizations suffering, and what would you say is the root of that?
Hmm. Well, let me first speak to the root that I'm most familiar with, which
Mm,
is overworking, overdoing, over engineering, over efforting, over committing, over most everything. And I have worked in a handful of organizations and now have clients, around the world in all industries and types of organizations. And I have yet to meet one that has gotten that balance right, that really understands this idea of, focusing on the critical few and doing them well, and watching the kind of societal contextual uh, pull of sucking people in at the expense of their health and well-being, their relationships, etc. Balance is a choice that we make. It's personal. It doesn't look the same for everyone. And being in HR for over 20 years, we tried to sort of codify what work-life balance has looked like, and realize that what it looks like for me is going to be very different than what it looks like for you. So it really is on the shoulders of employees to set their own boundaries and to, decide if and how their working life is going to be well integrated with the rest of their life, right? Without pulling everything else down. Um, so I think there is a systemic addiction, at least in every context I've ever worked, that really reveres, honors, encourages, rewards the doer, the one who raises their hand, who takes initiative, who says yes, who says, I will do this no matter what. I will sacrifice everything in order to achieve whatever that next goal is. And we watch them and marvel at them. I mean, you mentioned the Olympics. I'm an Olympic junkie. There is, to watch an athlete be so focused and so dedicated and be so gifted and talented as well, and to know that and how to bring those together. But I imagine, like the story you just shared, for some of those athletes, it's all they do for a good portion of their life. And they finally need to then say, I kind of want to taste other parts of my life. So I'm going to retire, or whatever that looks like. So for me, that retire from corporate was sort of my first retirement. I called that chapter 1. And then I lived the last 5 years in chapter 2. Now I'm moving into chapter 3, which we can maybe chat more about. But I think there's an internal decision that you have to make, like, when is enough enough? And what are you willing to sacrifice in order to feed whatever is being fed? For me, it was a bit of being a success addict and a workaholic, and a doing addict, sort of all combined. I felt alive. I felt
mm,
capable. I felt empowered, and that became addictive. And once I recognized that sort of my doing life had me and I didn't have it, then I needed to step into greater consciousness and choicefulness. And so that's what I did. Yeah.
that's very interesting. And you talked about the doer, so of course we have to talk about your famous, very famous TED talk, where you talk about authentic inaction.
Yeah.
Never heard that
Non-intuitive.
before. You coined that phrase. So tell us more what that is, what that means, and how can we adopt that into our life? Because what I hear you saying is that hustle, that grind,
Mhm.
that always doing something can be actually detrimental. And as you mentioned, an addiction.
Yeah. I mean, we'll call it a competing priority. Some people have said, oh, well, maybe you just got older and your kids were older. And so now, it became time to shift things. I don't know that you need to wait until that is true either. I mean, when I left my corporate life, I guess my kids at that time were 8 and 10. I'm grateful. They don't remember me being that workaholic at the dinner table who was on her phone after being gone all day. They don't remember how, hopefully, maybe they will. I know my mom's like, oh, they're going to need therapy anyway, might as well be about that. Because she was a workaholic. I'm like, yeah, I think I did have a few therapy sessions over that. But I think there is this place where you come into greater contact and choice. But being a doing addict. So first and foremost, let me talk a little bit about the concept authentic inaction. So inaction being one word. And this idea of not taking action is not attractive to most, right? Like it's not about procrastination or doing nothing and kind of hoping that, prosperity shows up at your front door without you having to effort anything. That is definitely not what I'm saying. What authentic inaction is, first and foremost, it's a practice of slowing down, being with, right? Kind of letting in, being with, and then letting go of our inherent need to do, to act, to raise our hand, to say yes, to not be still. And authentic inaction then is about really bringing that doing and being life into greater harmony. And it could be a second, it could be minutes, it could be months where you are sitting in inaction around something. So take the big decisions, a new job. How many people sit and suffer in a job that doesn't serve their life anymore in most any way, but they're afraid to maybe leave, or maybe they've lost confidence in themselves. And so I think there is this point at which we need to be willing to sit with the indecision and not do anything until that action, that next action that we want to take, is clear. And that requires some internal work, some sense of stillness, and some willingness to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what to do, but knowing that there's probably a better choice for you at any given time. So that's the concept of authentic inaction. And then the doers, I just sort of started studying when I realized, like, oh my goodness, I'm a doing addict. What do I want to do with that? I started to look around me, and I was surrounded by them. But there's some nuances, maybe some differences between different people in terms of why that doing addiction stays in place. So I talk about the achieving doer, the avoiding doer, the controlling doer, the supporting doer, and the perfecting doer. And each of those kind of do for different reasons. So I'll just pull two. So the achieving doer, who they are and what they do, what they're capable of, what they achieve, is so linked that what they do becomes who they are. And to separate the two almost feels like a loss of self, a loss of identity. So that keeps that in place. The controlling doer sort of does because, well, they're not necessarily patient enough to allow other people to do it, or they want it a certain way. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be like, I want it done now, so I'll just do it myself, right? That mentality. We all know people who are like, forget it, don't worry about it, I'll just do it, because somehow the other person wasn't going to maybe do it as quickly or in the way that they wanted. So they just keep doing, and they get themselves stuck in this pattern. And then they look back and go, why is nobody helping me? Right. Why does nobody want to do it my way? But really they pushed people away, and they end up feeling, alone and unsupported. So there is a negative consequence to each type of doer in terms of keeping that doing addiction in place. But at some point, I guess I've realized, like, it has to create enough pain maybe, to have you make a different choice. And I get that, and that's okay, but know when you're in pain and don't suffer unnecessarily. So I think the suffering, then, to get back to the opening question, is really about the loss of when we do things that are not aligned with who we truly are. That's when we lose our sense of self. And I think organizations, in all their good intention, but encouragement to keep doing and trying and saying yes, and to overcommit and overdo. I mean, performance ratings, you get a 1 because you are an overdoer. You don't get a 1 because you do your job really well, right? You get a 1, you get that beloved or coveted 1 because you do way more than is expected, even if it doesn't always deliver value. Um, you know
Mm.
what I mean? It's like, I'm committed. Look at me, self-sacrificing my own health and well-being and relationships for this entity that I work for. Um, and I'm sure people are listening going, that sounds so ridiculous to do that, but millions are doing it, honestly, millions. Yeah. And I was one of them. And I really was complicit in that. I modeled to the world what it looked like to be successful is to overdo. And I know I directly encouraged people to do it too. And I have to live with that.
I'm trying to think of what's the balance though, because I know that a lot of people listening they're leaders. They want success. They want
Mhm.
to, even if they're in careers, I want to climb the corporate ladder. I want achievement.
That's right.
So where is the balance between you execute, put in the work, make sure that you are creating value where you work, but not overdoing it or doing it to your
Mhm.
own detriment. That's where I feel like, especially if you're on the upward end of your
Part of
career,
your career where you're really, yeah,
exactly. You're trying to elevate in your career. You want that promotion. What is the balance, or how do you find balance, or is there balance?
yeah, I love it. It is the question. You nailed it. You nailed it. I mean, that's the question to sit with. And I think for every person, it is going to be a little different. So it's not just well, if you're working less than 40 hours a week, you should be okay. I wish it was that simple. It's really, I think, first and foremost about aligning who you are with what you do. And by that, I mean, what are you really up to in the world? And how does your working life in particular, although this is not just people who work, this could be stay-at-home parents, this could be community activists, right? We just get so attached and so involved in the doing part of our life, in sort of showing up and doing well and achieving things. So it doesn't just have to be, corporate is not the villain at all. They didn't ask me to do anything I either didn't say I would do or actually modeled for others to do. So this is on me. But I think the question of what's too much, for me, my health, when you start to speak with a stutter and you sort of have a tremor in your 40s, you're like, what's going on? And my doctor thought I had MS, got an MRI. Thankfully, I did not. But then I had to live with the fact that I had done this to myself. I had stressed myself so much. My adrenal system was so overloaded that it started to manifest itself in very visible ways physically. And
I'm
so I
curious,
think,
was it going to the physician, going to the doctor and getting this diagnosis about your adrenal system being out of alignment? Is that what was the tipping point for you?
oh
Or
my
no,
God,
you
I know the
continue
right
doing
answer would be yes. But the honest answer
you
is
continue doing.
I had lots of warnings well before that happened
Oh,
that I just didn't pay attention to. So yes, when, it was a wake up call, I'd call it like, oh my goodness, what have I done? But even then I stayed another 18 months. I mean, I was still living in Europe. So maybe I even stayed another 2 years. And I didn't necessarily cut back on anything. So I think I fought my diagnosis, right? I like, if it's to be, it's up to me. I'll just keep at it, right? I'll just keep working. This too shall pass. I mean, I justified it beyond means. Um, I think so. What the final catalyst was is we were living overseas. We moved back home, and I realized that I had missed this really incredible opportunity to make different choices in my life in a context that would have supported it. Europe is different than the US in some ways. And I was in Switzerland. They're very good at honoring boundaries. Nobody really works on the weekend. And if you do, you're not honored for it, right, Nick? No one is patting you on the back. It's kind of like, oh, how sad. It's kind of the opposite, right? Like, oh gosh. I mean, I can remember my boss at the time said, stop sending emails on the weekends. Stop it. Like immediately, this has to stop, like my first few months. And I was like, what do you mean? I was so thrown off. I don't like to come in Monday morning with this big inbox. And he's like, fine, then schedule them to go out at 8 a.m. Monday, but I don't want to see an email in my inbox on the weekend. And so I realized as I got back, I thought, oh my gosh, like it did shift me. I mean, there they take lots of holidays. So thank God for that. I had lots of family time, which I didn't have here. 2 weeks vacation versus like 8 weeks is a big difference. So yeah, but it was that final, like, Renee, what is this really about? And when you're that tired, my bones ached most days. You're more vulnerable. You're more, for me, I was a little bit like sad, and I could feel myself trying to give myself warning, and I could feel myself resisting those warning signals. And so, yeah, over time I got back. I was then commuting, and I was like, what is this life? This stinks. I want something different. So it was a series of things, but the short answer is that was a wake-up call, and it was an unavoidable. I couldn't deny physically what was going on for me. Yeah.
That's good. And you alluded to there being a chapter 3. Tell us more about what chapter 3 is.
Yeah. So, when you leave and you get new email and new passcodes and all that, I just put like RMD chapter 2 was my new like kind of title. Right. And I was very much wanting it to be different. And so that was more symbolic, like, okay, then my book is not over. It's not just 2 chapters, but what does this next chapter look like? And my second chapter was sort of going out on my own, finding my new tribes. What did it feel like to be in community? What's my new working hours? Who am I now as this more kind of stay at home when I can mom, right? There's like, I could play both of those roles. I could choose my calendar for the most part. So that was like chapter 2. I started writing. I started doing podcasts. I prepped for my TED Talk. I do keynote speaking. So I also have some different work that I do, as well as the coaching and consulting that I was doing on the inside. So chapter 3 is definitely stepping more into my thought leader life. It's turning my message around being a doing addict into a movement. It is about planning for this kind of last big self-expression, putting myself out there. I turned 50 this year or last year. And so it's this idea of like, what's the culmination of my work in the world so far? What is going to be of service for people in that space? And how can I step into that space with now embodying the freedom, joy, and grace that I've worked so hard to cultivate in my own life? What does it look like to show up successful kind of with a movement, but embodying those qualities and characteristics that are more representative of a healthy human doing work in the world that totally aligns with who she is and is an expression of her heart's deepest desires. So that's my chapter 3.
Wow. So I'm curious, I almost want to go back from the chapter 1 to the chapter 2. From moving from chapter 1 to chapter 2, did you have any identity? Did you struggle with any identity issues? And then I want to talk about your transition from chapter 2 to chapter 3, because that's very interesting to me. You made quite the leap. Was there kind of like, let me regain my sense of who Renee is, what Renee loves, what Renee does in her, free time now that she's created boundaries for her time?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So my identity in chapter 1 was I was a builder, not a manager. Like, I think pretty much every job I ever did was a new role that I could sort of create from nothing, hire the team. Like, I was able to have those like best team experiences and build something out of nothing. And I worked for, this high tech company in Silicon Valley. And then I went biotech, and then I was an expat. So all these labels that our corporate life gifts us. I mean, they are in a way gifts, as long as they don't become the only label we live by. And so I think identity wise, like to be associated with a successful organization, to be associated with an industry, to be associated with a job title, to be associated with, having people you were stewarding through their own working life. There was a lot of richness in those identities. So I did have to be done with those. I also had to go out into chapter 2. And this was, I think, that last final, like, are you sure you know what you're doing, Renee? I had to be willing to sort of start dipping in and out of people's lives. Because when you're on the inside and you're leading a transformation, or you're launching a new team, helping a leader launch a new team, you're with them for the long haul. You're really emotionally invested, and you kind of see it through, hopefully, from beginning to end. Whereas now I'm more of an advisor. I play at the intersection of leadership, psychology and really well-being. And I get to, in a way, dip in, and it's hard to be like, who am I to like dip in, sprinkle some dust on you and hope it turns out and then walk away? Can I really do that? And so when I left, when I came back from Europe, they offered me a executive role leading a large org development organization. And I said, no, I'm going to be an individual contributor, because I already knew in my mind's eye I was thinking of leaving. And so I said, let's see if I can dip in and dip out, not have a team, not be responsible, kind of have all the resource, and in that way, sort of some of those power constructs in place to get things done. Let's see if I can dip in and out of a client's life and still enjoy it. And I did, and I enjoyed it. And so that was kind of the last like identity that I needed to shed, is sort of like being there with you, beside you for the long haul, and delivering still feeling of meaning and value, being able to dip in and out and offer, in a way, like for the first time, full objectivity, which as a consultant, that's the biggest gift you bring to an organization, is objectivity. Like, I'm not embedded in your world, so I can see things differently. It doesn't mean I'm right, but it's cleaner, it's more objective, and there's value in that. So I really started to lean into that as an identity. Like, I'm here to hold a picture up objectively. You get to choose what you do, and I'll offer things, and I'll ask questions that you maybe haven't thought of, and I'll help you figure out exactly what it is you're up to. But in the end, it's yours, and I'm not attached either way. I just want I want what you want, and I want to help you get that. So it's different, and I'm really enjoying it a ton more than I thought I would.
You became anchored into who you are and what you wanted to contribute to the world, to companies, to organizations. That's awesome.
Right. Just by showing up fully and being present and not being so attached to outcome is a gift. Like, it's like freedom. I don't have to, angst for you, that grasp for you and strive for you, because I get to hold it lightly and help you hold it more lightly. It's really fun. It's a whole different way to sort of drive change, but I'm finding more meaning in it for sure. And health, health and well-being.
That's always super important. And the turning the chapter from chapter 2 to chapter 3, what you just said that stood out to me was more than a message, but a movement. Like, I feel like it's something you're birthing, like you're birthing a whole nother child. That's your baby. So tell me what kind of impact that you want to have with your movement.
Yeah. I love, you're so wise. To see things like that. Yeah. It's just, you just get there really quickly. So, this idea of a message to a movement, last year I did a mastermind, and it was about really Abby Gibbs. She's awesome. At Abby Gibbs. She's got a great Instagram following. She's a business coach, but she sort of coined this term, turn your message into a movement. And so for me, what that means is, I think that my TED Talk, people ask me, wasn't that just another thing to do? I'm like, oh, absolutely. But it was authentic action. Like, I authentically pursued that, as opposed to inauthentic action, which is doing stuff like as small as, sure, I'll meet you at 6 a.m. for a workout when I really do not want to, right? Or sure, I'll host the party, or I'll pick that up. And why did I do that? I'm like so mad at myself, right? Like, pit in the stomach, fully ignored it. I raised my hand anyway. So that's inauthentic action. Authentic action is that action. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Maybe it can actually be harder, but it's that action that you're choosing because it aligns greatly with, in that moment, or, that time, sort of period in your life, that season, what's really true for you and alive for you. So chapter 3, I'll first say what my blocker is who am I to have a movement? Like, honest, right? It's not, people call it imposter syndrome. I don't suffer from that much, but I do get the thoughts like, who am I to think that somehow my story, my insights, my journey could deliver value for somebody else? I think that even though the world, the universe affirms the message, and it's like, yes, this is an important message, it should be out there, and you're the one to deliver it, I still struggle with that. My bigger sort of superpower, what I'm building towards though, is, and this is why I need a kind of a global reach and be willing to have a global voice, sort of get out of my own way, is my superpower is really being able to listen really keenly and stay curious long enough to sort of harvest these nuggets of a conversation. of a dialogue, and be able to then, I could listen for an hour, and I could feel my brain sort of like creating more than breadcrumbs, right? These really like important red threads, and then playing that back to the group. And it's like clarity comes, like, yes, that's it. That's how I feel, or that's really what we meant, or here's where we're headed. And then be able to help them with all my background kind of move in that direction. So I don't know what the title of that is, but I know it's like my dream is like being at the World Economic Forum, facilitating dialogue with global leaders and being able to be that convener, that dialogue host that helps them really take that conversation and move it in the direction they most deeply desire. So that's chapter 3. I'm gonna have to get over a few, additional little constraints, mostly in my own mind's eye, but I know what they are. And I think I'm preparing myself to tackle them in the coming few years. And just a side note is my kids are graduating. See, I have 4 more years left. So once they're both away at college, then travel won't be such a burden anymore in terms of work travel. And so I can start to be out in the world in a bigger way then. So I'm not rushed. I'm not rushing this. I still have several years to reach it, but I'm on my path, and I'm taking it at a pace that honors my body, my mind, as well as my relationships and overall well-being.
That's excellent. And that's a great segue into how can we find you online and support you in this endeavor, this goal to be this global leader. Where can we find you online?
So I'm new. LinkedIn, I've been on that forever. And I do post free content around leadership, well-being, sort of self-help development almost daily. And I'm new to Instagram, but I'm building up that platform and I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's keeping me in my writing life. And so that's Renee M. Dineen, at Renee M. Dineen. So those are probably the two. And then my website's Renée Dineen. And then I have a whole website dedicated to the concept of my TED Talk, my movement, which is authenticinaction.com. Hundreds of resources free that I have scoured the earth for around this topic of slowing down, pausing, work-life balance, focus, all those related topics. So go and have fun with it. And if there's something that you're looking for, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to help.
Thank you. And final question, what has been your greatest lesson in your reset?
So my best boss was my first boss, and I was lucky. She was a working mom and really laid the groundwork that at the time I did not see myself doing. But later in life, I felt like that bridge was there, which is, you can have it all, just not at the same time. But more importantly, why would you want it at the same time? I was so used to tasting things, but not savoring them and digesting them and really like being with them and like harvesting all their goodness. It'd be like opening a beautiful orange and like licking the surface and putting it aside, as opposed to like putting it in your mouth and eating it and letting it fully immerse you. So, you can have it all, just not at the same time. That's a big lesson. And one I continue to hopefully teach in a better way than maybe I did for several years to other up and coming leaders and women in my space. So
I love that. I needed to hear that. So if no one else got anything out of that message, I needed to hear that. I've never heard it phrased like that. And that is so good.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you so much. Super appreciative, Renee.
Oh, you're a joy. Thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Focus on the critical few and do it well. Authentic in action, slowing, doing, being with, and letting go of our inherent need to do. Turn your message into a movement. If you're considering your own reset, seeking balance, harmony, or simply a change in your career or life, connect with me. I am Raven M. Harris everywhere, and my mission is to add value in every opportunity, every experience, and in every encounter. And the number one action Renee and I do want you to take is to share this message. Text it or email it to a friend who needs to hear this. Because remember, a reset is always available to you.